Yeah. Yeah.
Prof. Tamim. Prof. Tamim, I think we should start by 9:15.
I think we will wait for another 5 minutes. Otherwise, we'll start, inshallah. Please,
Please. Yeah.
Please,
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm trying to contact the secretary. She says he is trying in.
Yeah, but he can come in later. Doesn't matter.
That's okay. In 5 minutes, Ransi, in 5 minutes, inshallah.
Yeah, okay, inshallah.
9:15 sharp, we start, inshallah.
Okay.
Prof. Dato Usman, can we start now? Because
Yes,
he is
I'm
still
ready.
trying to link. I think there is a problem there. Is it okay?
I'm ready.
Because the audience will be waiting. Okay, Tansri has joined. Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. To begin our international webinar on Sharia and the pursuit of sustainable societies, let us invite Ustad Ramadan, the Imam of Masjid Zabida of Istak, to recite dua.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let us begin our seminar today with Kitab Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. آمين آمين يا رب العالمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي جعل أول يومنا هذا صلاحا وأوسطه فلاحا وآخره نجاحا والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى. O Allah, we beg thee on of good things which pertains to this day and days hereafter. You have bestowed on us the greatness of your ni'mah in which we could never imagine, and you have protected us from harm when we cannot detach ourselves from it. We have done deeds in which only you have the knowledge of its good or its bad. O Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate, bless all of us today in this webinar. Make it a stage for further prosperity and progress, and be of great benefit and contribution to the development of our people in Malaysia and the whole of the Ummah. O Allah, we plead that you shower tawfiq upon us, for us to continue to do good deeds that receive your pleasure and a harmonious life that you bless. O Allah, we seek your might to safeguard our physical self so that we continue to worship you. Keep us so that our hearts are filled with love. Please open our hearts so that we seek you always, just like how you open the hearts of those who are righteous. Please place us among those who keep to their promises and able to fulfill our responsibilities. Please make our life a witness to all deeds that you have enjoined us to do, O Allah, the most gracious, the most giving. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. تقبل الله منكم منا ومنكم. تقبل يا كريم.
Thank you, Ustad Ramadan Subuki, for your dua. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Honorable Professor Emeritus, Tansri Dato Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector IIUM, Honorable Professor Dr. Jasser Auda, President Maqasid Institute, Canada, Honorable Professor Dato Dr. Hashim Kamali, CEO, International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, Kuala Lumpur, Honorable Professor Datin Dr. Raihana Haji Abdullah, Director, Academy of Islamic Studies, University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur, Honorable Emeritus Professor Dato Dr. Usman Bakker, Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies, ISTAC IIUM, respected Deputy Rectors, Deans, Deputy Deans, IIUM academic staff, colleagues, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you all this morning to the international webinar on Sharia and the Pursuit of Sustainable Societies, organized by International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTEC, International Islamic University, Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, IIUM. ISTEC is dedicated to engage in advanced level study and research about Islamic thought and civilization at the national and global levels, with the goal to nurture comparative, cultural, and civilizational studies that is dedicated to the renewal of Islam and human civilization. Its mission is to produce a new breed of academics and scholars who are multilingual and multidisciplinary in their expertise, with knowledgeable understanding of the universal message of Islam for the advancement of Islamic thought and civilization, who can address new challenges and concerns facing the Muslim Ummah and humanity, which will enable meaningful living in the 21st century globalized world. The first of ISTEC's webinar series on the grand theme of sustainable development was held last month. The title of that webinar was Islamic Thought and Sustainable Development. The second webinar that is held today is going to discuss the topic, the Sharia and the Pursuit of Sustainable Societies. This topic is narrower than the previous one because this time we are focusing on the role of the Sharia in relation to sustainable development and the pursuit of a sustainable society. We know that the Sharia is not the whole of Islamic thought, but only an aspect of it, although it is a major and central one. Admittedly, by focusing on the Sharia and limiting its role to the pursuit of sustainable societies, our topic is still a broad one. But it is our intention to have the topic as broad as possible so that the panelists will have plenty of space to move around and a greater freedom to express their views on the topic of discussion. ISTEC feels that today's topic deserves a good treatment at the hands of competent scholars and experts for the benefits of not only the academia and university students, but also for the general public. It is a very important topic for all groups in society to be familiar with, since the creation of a sustainable society requires the contribution of everyone. However, for some reason, topics linking the Sharia to sustainable development are seldom discussed in public forums, such as the kind of forum we are having now. To be sure, there have been a lot of discussions on sustainable development and the idea of sustainability, but these discussions do not make any attempt to relate it to the Sharia. Likewise, there have been many discussions on the Sharia, but these discussions do not try to relate it to issues of sustainable development and sustainability. It seems that many people just do not see that there is a meaningful connection between the Sharia and issues of sustainable development and sustainability of societies. It is the main objective of today's webinar to get the panelists to explain to us what the conceptual and practical connections is between the Sharia and sustainable development and societal sustainability. We are indeed fortunate to have with us as panelists today experts on the Sharia and scholars who are knowledgeable about the topic of discussion. Professor Jasser Auda and Professor Dato Hashim Kamali are the world's leading authorities on the Sharia, and in particular on Maqasid as-Sharia, which is growing in popularity by the day. I am sure they will be talking about Maqasid as-Sharia in their presentations, since the Maqasids provide one of the main connections between the Sharia and the idea of sustainability. Professor Datin Raihana Abdullah and Professor Dr. Usman Bakker will complement the expertly discussions and presentations of Professor Jasser Auda and Dr. Hashim Kamali with their own perspectives and insights on the Sharia and its relevance to the pursuit of sustainable societies. Today, the Sharia is viewed negatively, not only among non-Muslims, but also among Muslims. Many people reduce Islam to the Sharia, and the Sharia in turn is reduced to its penal code, which is perceived as a harsh one. Misconceptions of the Sharia abound, and these to be addressed in an intelligent way. Misconceptions of the Sharia abound, and these to be addressed in an intelligent way. It is our sincere hope that today's webinar that concentrates on the positive role of the Sharia in the creation of a sustainable society would help to dispel the widespread misconceptions about its place and role in society in modern times. Without taking much of your time, I first respectfully call upon Professor Emeritus Tansri Dato Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector of IIUM, to open this seminar by sharing his thoughts on the topic of Sharia and the pursuit of sustainable societies. فليتفضل Tansri Rector.
You're on mute, Prof.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu asyrafil anbiya mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. La haula wala quwwata illa billah. Professor Tamim, my brothers, Professor Jasser Auda, Professor Hashim Kamali, Professor Usman Bakker, Datin, all of them, I think in a way is my guru, because I've been reading their books, and otherwise I will not be able to even appear on the screen today, and not knowing very much what I'm going to be talking about. But nevertheless, Alhamdulillah, we are able to meet today to discuss something which I think it is very important. Professor Tamim has underlined very, very crucial information that we need to bring forward, so that we can close the gap between the misunderstanding that either is deliberately or otherwise being created around us, so much so that we become dysfunctional in many respects. Yeah? Certainly, when we talk about Sharia, I think the first thing that comes to mind for people who are not familiar with terminologies are about cutting heads and cutting hands. Yeah? And therefore, most people would not want even to talk about it, because it is something that they see is very harsh. I have a very unhappy experience when I was invited by University of Tokyo to talk about sustainability and Islam. Before me, there was a Buddhist monk who talked about Buddhism and sustainability. When he was speaking, I think the hall was almost full, if not full. Everybody wants to listen to what the Buddhism has to offer, particularly Zen Buddhism. Yeah, but when my turn comes, I think half of the room was left empty, because they thought Islam do not have anything to offer as far as sustainable development is concerned. Yet after the discussion, I think there was a lot of people who said we have not heard about this, we have not thought about this, and Islam has been misrepresented in many ways. So I am really very, very happy that ISTAC is taking this role for the second time, trying to bridge this gap between whatever has happened into the new pandemic sort of situation that has given us a lot of color and a lot of awareness that this COVID-19 has opened another dimension that we need to talk about, where Islam is, I think, fitting very, very nicely in terms of its demonstration, in terms of its relevance, and also in terms of its contemporariness. Yeah. So unless and until we take this opportunity and to make it relevant to us and also to the people around us, particularly the non-Muslim in the West, we will not be able to actually bridge this gap. And Alhamdulillah, today I hope we are beginning to step into it. And my early discussion with Professor Jasir, which I happened to meet in Usim in person, but had been reading his book. He changed my whole perception of what Maqasid is all about. Prof, to be honest, when I read Maqasid, I feel it's a very archaic kind of concept that talks about just yourself, you know, and the things around you, and the society around you do not even come into picture. It's only when I read your book that you can expand the definition, and suddenly sustainable development fits in very nicely. Yeah, when you talk about the 5 elements and we talk sustainable development, I think this is something that can go hand in hand very nicely, and we have been trying to develop. And just to let you know, this university has taken sustainable development as part of its posture to move forward post-pandemic, and certainly to meet some of the international goal of United Nations, UNESCO education for 2030, so that we can find the relevance of Islam in this particular context, right? Now, after saying that, let me try and attempt to say what I think this whole perspective is all about, to make a confession that I'm not Arabic speaking. Neither am I a trained Islamic scholar, but yet a Muslim who wants to understand what this is all about. And therefore, being a Muslim, that is my only credentials having to talk about what this is going to be as far as I'm concerned. And I start with a number of apologies for those scholars that I'm prepared to stand corrected and, you know, tell me where I've gone wrong. But nevertheless, the aspiration is still, how do we make this happen in the context that we are in today? Yeah. So Sharia and the pursuit of sustainable societies, and we, Alhamdulillah, International Islamic University has been given a status of the regional centers of expertise on sustainable development last year, after bidding kind of an offer that we are now able to construct what sustainable development means within the context of Islam, in the perspective and the worldview of Islam. And that, I think, is a major work that we are doing today. And this contribution that you're going to have this morning will certainly aid us in terms of some of the issues that we are facing at the moment. Alhamdulillah, we are also being given a kind of a status, what we call the Sustainable Institution of the Year by United Nations Environment. Last June, awarded was given in New York, but we are not able to attend. But yes, again, this is another credential that we want to use to uplift the understanding of what sustainable development within the context of Islam, inshallah. Right. So let me begin by asking the question, what is a sustainable society? I think often enough when we talk about society, the word sustainable do not appear. And if it appears also, it appears in a very skewed way. And hence, many of our societal quality today do not answer to what I think sustainability is all about. And this is where I think we need to come very quickly to understand what sustainability is all about within the context of the secular knowledge, and certainly also within the context of the spiritual or Islamic or even religious knowledge as such. Yeah? From my point of view, when we talk about sustainability, there must be at least these 3 elements. I think we talk about balance. The whole thing must be in a state of balance. And I think this, again, if I'm not mistaken, Quranic in its nature. It has to be orderly, and there's hierarchy. There are places for things. Things are not just placed the way it is randomly. There is an order. Sometimes we do not understand this order, but the order, I think, needs to be faithfully followed. And hence, at the end of the day, we will get this peace, be it within or be it outside. right? I'm sure my brothers will enhance it a little bit more from the Quranic and the Islamic understanding. But these are, I think, the three elements of sustainability that I think is important, which is not even in the definition, the secular definition of sustainability. I think the word balance is not there. And hence, when we talk about sustainability, we have a difficulty in trying to, for example, understand what sustainability in the US is and sustainability in another country in the global South. Yeah. The reason is very simple. United States of America, I think, has been well documented, is living on resources of 5 planets. Right? I repeat that. Yeah? The United States is living on the resources of 5 planets. Europe has been living on the resources of 3 planets. Certainly, you find that because there's only one planet, then many countries, particularly developing countries, Muslim countries, are deprived of their quote-unquote rights to these resources that belongs to them rightly so. And therefore, this whole issue of balance do not appear. So America tried to probably project what is sustainability from the American point of view, right? Lately, from our good friend Donald Trump. And this is something that we are now to try to grapple with. What is it when we talk about sustainability and balance, the kind of measure that we want to have? And Islamic certainly have its own understanding of what balance is all about in the orderly and the peaceful manner that I'm trying to convey today. So I think we need to start with this idea of what sustainability is all about in the real definition of it, so that we do not get confused with concept that is now being thrown around the world in trying to justify where people are in the context of sustainability and sustainable development. Now, this then will refer very clearly to me in the kind of the macrocosmos, the world, the outsiders that we need to interact. My understanding is when we talk about sustainable, it is just beyond the planetary understanding. We need to go into universal understanding. And this is where, again, the whole concept of Rahmatan lil Alamin that is taken up very strongly in our religion becomes a kind of a unique understanding of what this sustainability is all about. Often when we talk about sustainability in the secular or even United Nations, UNESCO definition, we're just talking about the planetary kind of understanding. We need to go beyond that in the context of Rahmatan lil Alamin, and yet conveying very 3 important ideas that correlates very well with, I think, the definition of sustainability in the context of balance, orderly, and peaceful. In other words, it has to be equitable. And this is where I think the balance was I was talking about geopolitically, where the balance is and who is holding this balance. Yeah, it has to be harmonious. In other words, everything falls into place in a very peaceful and harmonious way. And it leads into what we are now been talking about, particularly with this post-COVID understanding of how things needs to be prosperous, but in a very equitable way. In other words, there is no great disparity between the rich and the poor, between the have and the have-nots, between the developed and the developing, and all these other divides that we are facing in. And this is where, to my understanding of what sustainability is all about, that connects human being with his entire nature. In other words, the environment around us, the trees, whatever it is, become, quote unquote, the kind of guidance that you will see. How do nature live by itself in a very harmonious way? And I think we have got this very nice demonstration that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us when we were all locked down. At least within my campus, when we were locked down for 2 months, we find that the rivers are cleaner, the air is certainly fresher. There are animals coming out, those animals will be hidden for a long time. They are now beginning to find their own space within the campus, all sorts of animals that was not there before, because we have been dominating the environment that pushed them aside. Now they're coming out as an equivalent rights to this environment, the birds, the bees, even the wild boar, I think, comes out in our campus and sharing the environment as such. And I think this is what it is all about when we talk about sustainability within the context of Islam and taking nature and the microcosmos into consideration. So we need to understand, I think, the very crux of it. It is all about sharing. And in this COVID environment, everybody talks about sharing now. You know, what is it that we can share together? What is it that we can learn together? How do we be inclusive? And I think this whole idea of inclusiveness becomes very, very clear when people talk about Black Lives Matters. In North America, the word Black Lives Matters gives us another understanding of how some people has been pushed aside for a long time. Despite the democracy, despite whatever you talk about in the goodness of things, but there are sections of human being being left behind for a long time. And I think this is coming up to fore. And it's not just the human beings now, we are talking about animals at the same time. Other forms of life that's been neglected. And this is where, again, when we try to understand COVID-19, suddenly we find these animals that have been living very closely to us becomes an issue that could threaten human life at the same time, because this whole idea of sharing becomes a very difficult idea to understand when human beings begin to conquer or invade other spaces that do not belong to them. Yeah. So as we talk about the planetary dimension, as I mentioned to you, for Muslims, I think we need to go beyond the planetary dimension, knowing that our world is not just limited to a number of planets, but this whole what you call rahmatan lil alamin that I was talking to you just now. Yeah. So the whole idea of sharing is about interconnectedness. It's about relationship. It's about building trust. It's about building a kind of a brotherhood, if you want to put it that way. It is not something which is hypocritically defined. Yeah, you say that I work with you, but there are disparities. Yeah, we talk about people and we still look down upon people because they are not of the same color or the same breed or the same understanding. I think this interconnectedness is something that comes from the heart, which genuinely binds people together and understand life as it were. And therefore, what I say, all life matters. That will be the fundamental that we looked at when we talk about these interconnectors. How do life support with one another? How do the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes, you know, a part and parcel of this world that we are talking about, right? In a very layman term, we have coined a very simple understanding of what sustainability is all about. Some people define sustainability in a very casual way: enough for everyone forever. And I think there's something to do with Gandhi used to say, you know, it's enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. Yeah. So when we talk about sustainability, it's about this whole thing. How do you give everybody their own rights so that they can live as dignified human beings as Allah Ta'ala wants them? And how do you support each other so that humanity become that one humanity that we talked about? Yeah. So my understanding of sustainability rotates around this, and I'm sure it touches a lot on the Sharia. I hope I will be able to what you call to justify myself in that particular understanding. Now, I would want to go into a very simple understanding of what the sustainability is all about when we look at Sharia in a very indirect way. I want to use an example of the Aral Sea, which is situated near Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Yeah, and that's the map of the sea in 1957. It is full flush. And by the time 2015, which is just 5 years away, you find that the gray area that marks where the water is becomes very, very minimum. What has happened? The whole thing now has been turned into a kind of a desert. It has dried up. All right. And the reason for this, I think, is quite simple. And I want to go back into one of the Quranic understanding. And it says that the destruction has spread on land and sea. And I guess this is one very simple example that how the spread of destruction has gone on land and sea. And the reason for this is quite simple. It says here, as a result of what humans' hands have done. And this is where the human hands that are not familiar with the idea of balance, orderliness, peacefulness, the sharing that we talk about, in a nutshell, sustainability. And in the case of the RLC, it is due to the irrigation for increased cotton production to feed into a textile industry that was built around that place. Yeah. So human being has begun to manipulate the environment, trying to build another sustained economy, as it were. At the end of the day, becomes a kind of a Bosch experiment that leads to this drying up of the Ural Sea. And it goes on and saying, so that God may cause them to taste the consequences of their deeds. And I think the action the unsustainable action, if you want to put it that way, has caused in this particular case 2.75 million hectares affected through land degradation as a result of poor water management. There is water, the sea definitely there's a water, but because we have got into a wrong way of managing it, and it has turned into something which is bad. And why do we manage it badly? Because this is the element of greed that comes in. Yeah. Everything else now, according to one study, is polluted with herbicides, with metal, with salts. Yeah, and this is coming out from the hospital doctors who are attending this patient. Everything has been polluted. Everything has been degraded. Everything has been destructed because of the greed of the human beings. And this is where I think the issue that we need to come back to when we talk about balance, when we talk about this orderliness, and so on and so forth. But it is not for nothing. Yeah, and the Quran goes on to say, and perhaps they might return to the right path. Now, all these things that are happening around us is a moment for us to reflect where we have gone wrong. What have we taken to the extreme in the context of not just terrorism? Yeah, and I also talk about economic terrorism, that people earn thousands and millions of dollars, and there are now 8 people around the world who have 50% of the world assets today, and they are now manipulating how we should run our life, and given all these disparities that we talked about. And I don't know, when we look at this again now, the RLC has been, seems to be another place where people, animals can start to graze and stuff like that. Maybe this is the return of what we are now facing as we learn the mistakes that we make. So in a nutshell, I think it really demonstrated to me what is happening around the world is what is actually being narrated and being reminded over and over again in many parts of our religion, and particularly the Quranic verses as such. Little as it is, I hope I have made the right conclusion in this particular sense. So to conclude, I think we need to understand this whole human nature, the sustainable society. It is not on its own. I think it has its own mechanism that relate to the interconnectors that I talked to you about. We need to start with the divine sort of aspiration that all of us Muslims believed in. Yeah. And this divine aspiration is where we talk about the microcosmos within us before we begin even to understand what the macrocosmos is all about. This relationship, this interconnectedness, this balance, I think, needs to be alive. And unfortunately, in many of our education system, in many hours of our system, do not talk about this balance in a very meaningful way. And hence we are left into this, the understanding of just one part of what life is all about, and the divine understanding that human beings needs to be balanced within itself before it could balance with other human beings, and then talk about the human being with the environment, which then creates what I was saying just now, the sustainable societies within the ambit of our human life, and to understand, therefore, at the end of the day, the higher purpose of life. And the higher purpose of life is that was demonstrated from the RLC, that we have damaged what God has created us. When I say that, all life matters, all creation matters, these are something to be the purview that we should have actually looked after and make it good, but we have failed to do so. So my understanding at the end of the day, if we get this right, then we can talk about where we are going to go as not only a human being, but also as a spiritual being at the same time. And this is a balance that needs to be struck when we talk about sustainability in the real essence of it, rather than just from the secular or external dimension. Yeah? Understanding this then will give us a better understanding of what the sustainable development goal is all about. And this university, for my brothers, I think we are not happy with the 17 goals. We are now trying to reconstruct what we call this SDG 18, which is an added one that will talk about spirituality, spiritual knowledge, and also these other things that is missing from the secular dimension. I hope you can help us in trying to reconstruct this so that the whole idea of spirituality as a spiritual human being becomes part and parcel of this construct of sustainable society, which has been left behind in the discussion as it happened in the last 3 decades or so. So on that note, I will humbly submit, thank you very much for this opportunity. I stand to be corrected, but I will look forward to the discussion at the end of this session. So thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Transri Rector, for your thoughts on sustainability of societies. Your presentation is very inclusive, and there are questions already from the audience. Inshallah, we will go through these questions at the end of our webinar.
Inshallah.
Our next speaker is Honorable Professor Jasser Auda from Canada. To introduce him briefly, Professor Jasser Auda is a scholar of Islam. His latest contribution is a new maqasid methodology that aims to bring about a restructuring of Islamic scholarship around a complex network of the higher objectives, maqasid of the Quran and prophetic traditions. He is the president of Maqasid Institute Global, a think tank registered and building research and educational projects in a number of countries. He is a Shatibi Chair for Maqasid Studies at the International Peace University in South Africa, a founding and board member of the International Union of Muslim Scholars, an executive member of the Fiqh Council of North America, a member of the European Council for Fatwa and Research, and the chairman of the Canadian Fiqh Council. He has a PhD in the philosophy of Islamic law from the University of Wales, UK, and a PhD in systems analysis from the University of Waterloo, Canada. Early in his life, Professor Jasser Auda has memorized the Quran and undertook traditional studies at the study circles of Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, Egypt. He worked previously as a professor at the universities of Waterloo, Ryerson and Carleton in Canada, Alexandria University in Egypt, Faculty of Islamic Studies, Qatar, American University of Sharjah, United Arab Emirates, and University of Brunei, Darussalam, Brunei. Professor Jasser Auda has lectured on Islam and its law in dozens of countries and wrote 25 books in Arabic and English, some of which were translated to 25 languages. With this brief biodata, let me respectfully call upon Professor Jasser Auda to make his presentation. فليتفضل يا أستاذ.
جزاكم الله خير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه مباركا عليه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى والصلاة والسلام على أسعد خلقه وخاتم رسله صلى الله عليه وآله رضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Thank you very much, Professor Tamim, and I am honored to be on the same panel with Professor Datu Zulkifli Abdul Razzaq, and it's such a pleasure that we met before the lecture and we had a chat. I'm honored to be on the same panel with two of my ustads that we grew up learning from their books and their contributions, Professor Datu Usman Bakker and Professor Datu Hashim Kamali. Both are contributors to the journey of the renewal of Islamic thought that we are trying to pursue their steps in, alhamdulillah. Happy to be on the panel with Professor Datin Rayhana, Jazakallah khairan, and alhamdulillah, it's such a missing link that I'm not in Malaysia itself to speak, which I enjoy very much, but alhamdulillah, at least there is an online link and there is a spiritual link that Prof. Abdul Razzaq talked about. I would like to make a couple points, inshallah, building on what our brother Professor Abdul Razzaq mentioned. And I am building on what he said because all of what he said is part of the Islamic worldview to sustainability. And I'm glad that he is bringing that. I'm glad that IIUM is taking these steps for sustainability, but it's not taking the definition of sustainability blindly, but trying to define things. IIUM is doing that. And for us as Muslims outside Malaysia, we look at Malaysia as a country that is trying to redefine things economically and politically. And inshallah, this is part of the effort that the Ummah with many of its organs should be doing in order to stand on our feet in the next while. Let me talk about a couple of things. One is the definition of Shari'ah, and the other is the definition of sustainability. Oftentimes, we look at Shari'ah in a very partialistic way. We define Shari'ah as some sort of an individual question and answer that somebody asks about matters of ibadah, about the ritual side of Islam, sometimes about the matters of family, the ahwal shakhsiyah or the family law in Islam, and sometimes theoretically about the criminal law of Islam. But this is all partialistic. This is all looking at the Sharia without the Quranic definition of the Sharia. My brother, Prof. Tamim, in the introduction said that I am working mostly now from the maqasid al-Quran, from the objectives of the Quran, which are wider than the objectives of the Sharia that are called maqasid al-Sharia, that are, of course, from the Quran, but the maqasid al-Quran are much wider than that. I'll speak about that. If you look at the Quran, you will find that the Sharia has to do with the deen. شَرْعَ لَكُم مِّنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحًا. And the deen in Islam is not just a faith. The deen is a way of life. And the Sharia literally, as an Arabic word, is a way of life. And therefore, we should not look at the Sharia as simple fatwas related to individualistic or sometimes family issues. The Sharia has to do with everything. And not just everything, but the fundamentals of everything. The Sharia has to do with the fundamentals of economics, the fundamentals of politics, the fundamentals of medicine, the fundamentals of social sciences in general, and natural sciences too. Not just the fundamentals of what we call Islamic sciences. The Sharia is about everything. And the objectives of the Sharia should define the objectives of sustainability. Because oftentimes the objectives of the Sharia, حفظ الدين والنفس والعقل والمال والعرض, the preservation of faith and life and so forth, sometimes it's taken apologetically to justify a system of sustainability that is not Islamic. And it is very important that the objectives of the Sharia define the system, not be defined by the system. We should not approach sustainability in an apologetic way, as we approach, for example, the human rights and said, well, you're talking about the Human Rights Charter. We have this from day one. In Islam, we have the same thing, the freedom from torture, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech. This is Islamic. And we try to apologize for a system from an Islamic point of view, where the Islamic authentic and original and fundamental and Quranic point of view is actually a different view. We don't view the system of rights in Islam the same way. And we don't view the system of sustainability in the same way. Yes, we agree that we should have no hunger and people have to be healthy and people have to have education. We agree on equity and life under sea and on land, etc., etc. But we have a very different definition of these things because the higher objective in Islam is ibadatullah, is the worship of Allah, the spirituality that Prof talked about before me. The highest objective is ibadatullah. And from ibadatullah, from the worship of Allah, we do these things. And if we, as humanity, not just as Muslims, agree that worshiping Allah is our highest objective, then we are going to leave some of our greed because Allah wants us to leave that. We are going to leave some of our ambitions and selfishness and violence because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to leave that for His sake. Related to ibadatullah is islahul ard, that is one of the highest objectives in the Quran, in Islam. Islah al-ard, rectification of the earth, has to do not just with the material part of it, but the social part of it too. Because al-ifsadu fil-ard, the corruption on earth, happens first and foremost, according to the Quran, by murder, by killing people. So if people are losing their lives because of mismanagement and because of the lack of medicine and because of so many of tyranny and so forth, if people are losing their lives because of the war trade that is happening, then this goes against sustainability, even before we talk about no poverty and zero hunger. Life is number two after the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, human life. And dignifying humans is not just a legal concept. Dignifying humans has to do with taqwa in the Islamic perspective. And humans, in terms of dignity, in the Islamic perspective, are not all equal. They are different. Yes, there is a basic dignity for everybody, but people are more dignified when they have more taqwa. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. You are more dignified when you have more taqwa, the Quran is saying. And therefore, the concept of dignity here, and therefore the concept of equality, is not just equality across the board if you are a believer or a disbeliever, if you are a good person or an evil person, if you are a corrupter on earth or a reformer on earth. We're not all equal. Reformers have a higher degree than corruptors. Yes, we're all equal in basic dignity in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in front of the law as citizens, etc. Yes, this is all Islamic, but the concept of dignity upon which we build the Islamic human rights is a concept that is tied to the worship of Allah. And the human is more dignified when they worship Allah and when they have a better character and when they help each other, etc. The problem here is that we go and define sustainability without the Sharia as a way of life. And therefore we apologize. Take some examples. No poverty. The concept of no poverty in Islam is not tied to relieving the poor. It is tied to restraining the rich. Imam Ali radiallahu anhu has a very interesting talk when he was a Khalifa, and he said, فرض الله في أموال الأغنياء أقوات الفقراء فما جاع فقير إلا بما متع به غني. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the basic needs of the poor from the wealth of the rich. And therefore, no one should go hungry except with the excesses of the rich. If the poor goes hungry, he says, this is because of the excess of the rich. So it's not no poverty. It is no excess richness. This is how we should approach this. And if we approach it, no excess of the rich, the Islamic approach is not just a philosophical approach. It gives us numbers and it gives us laws. It says, take 2.5% of the rich's accumulation of wealth every year. And if they don't use this in trade, then at less than 40 years, they will lose their fortune because they accumulated land, they accumulated gold, they accumulated wealth, not just for their personal use. A rich person could have a $10 million home, but cannot have 20, 50, 100, $10 million homes. Then the other homes are going to be kens or treasures or wealth that is taxable from the Islamic point of view, zakatable. And if they give 2.5%, imagine 2.5% across the board on all of these trillions of people, trillions of dollars that we have in the hand of handful of people. Prof. Dato mentioned that some people are now trillionaires and not just billionaires. And the COVID-19, speaking in our context today, is a huge transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. This is how it is. And we cannot approach it from a Sharia perspective without understanding that this is a transfer because of a broken health system, a health system that depends on the pharmaceutical companies, and the pharmaceutical companies are making billions of dollars out of countries. I'm in Canada here, it's supposed to be a very strong country, but we are begging the pharmaceutical industry to help us with the vaccine And it's very interesting. We are, as Canadians, we're looking at it and we're shocked. How come the government is weaker than the companies? And some of the parties here are saying that. And it's very interesting that there is a health system. Health is point number 3 in the Sustainable Development Goals. How can we approach the health issue from the Islamic point of view? The health issue, the health in Islam is a right, and it is not a business. When the Prophet ﷺ put the tent of Rufaidah in his mosque, he initiated ﷺ the institution of hospitals right from the mosque. And our civilization knew that institution as a waqf, as an endowment. In the Islamic sense, we don't understand the medication as a business and not even as a government monopoly. Medication is a charity that the society pools their resources to build hospitals, and hospitals are managed for the sake of the sick, not for the sake of making money. This is a very different system. So yes, we agree on the concept of health, but the concept of health in Islam is a waqfi concept, is an endowed kind of societal initiative. Education too, which is number 4 in the Sustainable Development Goals. Educational systems in Islam, again, is not a business and is not a government monopoly and is not a business people kind of endeavor for their making wealth. Education in Islam is the foundation, is an endowment as well. And that's why the istimar, or the colonialism, we call it istimar in Arabic, but it's really ihtilal. Colonialism made sure that the awqaf are not functioning so that they cut the societal support of the educational institutions in the Muslim civilization and the health institution in the Muslim civilization and the library institutions, the libraries as well, Buyut al-Kutub, or the houses of books. They were endowed too. They were not private business. And therefore you have quite a different worldview when you come from the Islamic point of view and sustainability. You agree to no poverty and zero hunger and health and education, but you define these things differently. And here the Sharia comes in a serious way to offer an alternative. We are with no poverty, but we are about taxing the rich. And we are with health for everybody, but we are about making medicine a right, not a business. And we are about education, but education is not even a right. If farida is an obligation. طلب العلم فريضة على كل مسلم ومسلمة. Prophet ﷺ said it is an obligation to seek knowledge, to seek an education. Now, if it's an obligation, I cannot be banned from it if I am poor. That is something that the society has to allow me to do from the Islamic point of view. And therefore, this holistic and comprehensive and total understanding of the Sharia as a way of life would make us define the sustainable goals in a different way. Life underwater and land and on land is a very interesting objective as well, because we define the creatures in the water and the land as أمم أمثالكم وما من دابة في الأرض ولا طائر يطير بجناحيه إلا أمم أمثالكم. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, there is nothing in the land or the air but nations like you, communities like you. So the fish in the sea and the animals and so on are not just, interesting to watch, are not just the wonders of nature. They are communities like us, and we are not allowed to destroy them or kill them. It's haram, because we are only allowed to kill al-an'am, or the cattle, a number of animals for food, but otherwise we're not allowed to just kill everything and destroy everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger forbade the cutting of a tree, forbade the killing of an animal if it's not for food. Therefore, all of the other animals, we know the hadith on the man came to the Prophet ﷺ, the physician, and he came with a frog, and he was killing the frog to get a medicine out of it. And the Prophet ﷺ forbade him from killing the frog and told him, you're not supposed to kill an animal to medicate. This is a different philosophy and a different approach. When we talk about innovation, what is that? And how can we protect ideas? Should we protect ideas with laws that monopolize medicine and monopolize basic technology, or should we protect ideas by encouraging ideas? The tying of innovation to the intellectual property laws is actually un-Islamic, because from the Sharia perspective, the innovation is actually something that people create. Al-ibda', al-tajdid, al-fikr, the thought. The thought in Islam is not a property and it's not a business. Yes, it is a business to be a teacher or to, that is a profession. But what you produce, the knowledge in Islam, is not sold and is not supposed to be a means of making a monopoly. And therefore, you, for example, now under COVID context, we don't have enough vaccines. And because of the intellectual property and the international agreements, the poorer countries don't have the facility to even make their medicine. And even the rich countries, I'm talking from Canada, we don't even have the facility in Canada to create enough vaccines. And that is in the name of protecting innovation. But if protecting innovation is going to cost us lives, then the Sharia will say, no, this is not about that. Yes, you could protect your idea, you can sell it in the market, but the idea is not supposed to be protected like that, so that you make billions out of people's medicine and basic vaccine that they need to live. We have 500,000 people dead now in the United States, south of the border, not far from where I am here, which is amazing for a very rich country, as Prof said, living on the resources of 5 continents. Very interesting. And I could tell you as well that in Toronto here and in New York and in major cities in America, there is not just death because of COVID, there is hunger. In the Islamic associations here in Canada, we go out and feed people now, because people in the middle of capitalism and in the huge cities of North America are actually hungry. And some stats are very interesting, that like half of the children of the United States experienced hunger in the past year. So if people are going hungry in the United States, not just poor and rich, we can understand that, but hungry, what sustainability are we talking about? And how can the Sharia say that the sustainable goals are fine and no, the Sharia is saying in this case, no, that is unacceptable. The society has to change its status, and the whole system has to be challenged in that sense, because now there is no equity, there is no qist. And the qist is a very important maqsad of the Sharia. Allah said that He sent the books and messengers so that people establish equity. That is the maqsad of the Sharia. So I hope that these thoughts would bring us closer to how the Sharia should contribute to sustainability. What is Sharia? Sharia is not partialistic thinking or some, with all due respect, some silly issues that we debate about small things. Sharia is about the bigger picture. Sharia is about how the economy runs and whether people have medicine or not, and whether education is available for everybody or not, and whether lives are protected or lives are compromised for the sake of the economy, and whether humans are dignified in the name of being human, Muslim or non-Muslim, and allowed to excel so that their dignity increases, or they are oppressed and impoverished, and therefore they commit all sorts of crimes because they are not empowered in order to be dignified. That is how we can bring the Sharia in that sense. And that is an understanding of the Sharia that is comprehensive and that fits with the understanding of the true religion of Islam as a deen, a way of life of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not just the small issues. And I hope that these thoughts would, instigate some Q&A and some comments. Wa jazakumullah khair. Thank you very much again, Karima Kaseh, for inviting me. And I'm looking forward, inshallah, to seeing all of you out there in Malaysia when COVID allows us to travel. Wa jazakumullah khair, especially my ustads. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Jasser Auda, for your presentation. Very interesting. And we have numerous questions from the floor, and people are willing to listen to you more on the connection between Sharia and sustainability of societies, inshallah. We look forward for Q&A session very shortly. Our next speaker is Honorable Professor Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali, CEO of International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, Kuala Lumpur. To introduce Honorable Professor briefly, Honorable Professor Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali is founding CEO of International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, Malaysia, and an internationally renowned scholar in his field of specialization. He was Professor of Islamic Law and Jurisprudence at the International Islamic University, Malaysia, between 1985 to 2004. And then Dean of the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC, from 2004 to 2006. He holds a first-class honors degree in Law and Political Science from Kabul University, Afghanistan, and LLM and PhD in Islamic and Middle Eastern Law from the University of London. Dr. Kamali was assistant professor at the Institute of Islamic Studies, McGill University in Montreal, and later research associate with the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. He was a visiting professor at Capital University, Columbus, Ohio in 1991, and a fellow of the Institute for Advanced Study, Berlin, Germany, 2000 to 2001. He served as member and sometimes chairman of the Constitutional Review Commission of Afghanistan in 2003. He is a fellow of the International Institute of Islamic Thought, Herndon, and is currently on the International Advisory Board of the 13 academic journals published in Malaysia, United States of America, Canada, Kuwait, India, and Pakistan. He has addressed over 230 national and international conferences. He is also the sole author of 46 books and co-author or editor of 15 books and over 260 academic articles. His works have been hitherto translated into 13 languages. Professor Kamali has been member and chairman of the CIMB Sharia Committee, Sun Life, Takaful Malaysia, and formerly Stanley Corporation of South Africa. He was member of the Sharia Advisory Council of the Security Commission Malaysia. He is also senior fellow of the Royal Academy of Jordan. He received Ismail Farouqi Award for Academic Excellence twice in 1995 and 1997. He is listed in a number of leading who is who in the world. And he features in the book, The 500 Most Influential Muslims in the World, 2009, 2010, 2016, 2019, 2020, and 2021. He is a recipient of the King Abdullah II International Award, 2010, in recognition of his intellectual contributions towards serving Islam and Muslims. He is a recipient of the 24th Iran World Award for Book of the Year 2016 in 2017 and in 2019. He also received the special award, Halal Global Award on Islamic Civilization Studies 2019. On November 6, he was conferred with the title Datto in conjunction with the 64th birthday of His Royal Highness, the Sultan of Perak. With this brief introduction, may I respectfully call upon Professor Dr. Hashim Kamali to give his presentation. فليتفضل مشكورا يا أستاذ.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Thank you, Brother Professor Tamim Osama, for your kind introduction. And it is a privilege to sit with the luminaries who spoke on the subject, and I learned a great deal from Professor Tansri, the rector, and Professor Jasir Auda. The subject is Sharia in the pursuit of sustainable societies. How does the Sharia contribute to the idea of sustainability? Sustainability is a very broad concept, but Sharia relates to some of its aspects. Firstly, the Sharia is a code of conduct and a way of life that creates awareness among Muslims of a certain number of values. These values relate to the construction of a moral society and economy, and and lays down a number of rules and provisions that relates to the idea of sustainability, as I will be mentioning. The idea of the 5 values, in addition to the maqasid of Sharia, the daruriyat, protection of religion, protection of life, protection of rationality and rational judgment, protection of family and property. These are all related to the idea of making society sustainable, not for the present generation, but these are also for the future generation. Protection of life is not really confined to people now, but people, in fact, one of the aspects of protection of life is the procreation, to protect procreation and through marriage, and that is the aspect of sustainability of human life. Then also the structure of rights and obligations that are enacted and protected by the Sharia. They sustain societies and establish a balance. The balanced implementation of rights and obligation is what leads to justice. And justice as a central principle of Islam, and the Quran is very emphatic on justice. Justice is also a central concept, like Tansri earlier said, to the idea of sustainability. We have, in addition of, for example, these values of halal and haram, the idea of maslaha and mafsada, promoting public interest, preventing corruption and harm. When you read the hadith, the instruction of a hadith, la darara wa la dirara fil Islam. Harm may neither be inflicted nor reciprocated. This is, whoever goes against this, this is against Islam. This is an aspect of the Sharia, and it sustains society and generation through avoidance of harm. There is instruction in the hadith, al-Muslimu man salim al-Muslimuna min yadihi wa lisani. Almost as if defining the Muslim, who he is. A Muslim is one from whose hands, in words and tongue, others are safe. This creation of a safe environment is a part of the Sharia, and it is establishing that justice, that balance that leads to sustainability. And because Sharia is based in divine revelation, it is permanent. It is not. It is independent of governments. It has a place in Muslim societies that they observe it as a part of their religion. Whether the government of the day says so or not, in fact, this code of values that the Sharia puts in place creates the awareness among people. If their government goes against it or does something harmful or create a fasad and mafsada, even if they don't pronounce it, their sense of value would tell them. And there is a hadith, in fact, that a Muslim should not be a passive observer of whatever happens in society, something wrong. Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. When any one of you sees something going wrong and evil, let him correct it with his action. If he cannot do that, then let him do it with his words. And failing that, denounce it in his heart. That is the kind of advice that you get in the Sharia, and that contributes to making society, stabilizing society, making it sustainable. When the Sharia, the Al-Ahkam Al-Khamsa, Halal, Mandub, Mubah, and Makruh and Haram, these are the values that also relates closely to idea of what is beneficial and what is harmful. And eventually all of this, when they are observed, and it is a requirement of every Muslim to observe them. Some of them must be observed, some of them are in the nature of advice, but it does create that awareness that we come with a mission. We are also the the gatekeepers of these values and of the balance on earth. The idea of vicegerency in the earth, for example, is a mission focused on the idea of, as Professor Shari'Ah mentioned, on i'mar al-ard, like Ibn Khaldun's idea of Umran, that building civilization, constructing the earth. This is central to the idea of i'mar al-ard, which is a Quranic principle. In the verse of the Quran, He created you from earth and made it your assignment to build it. وَالَّذِي أَنْشَأَكُم مِّنَ الْأَرْضِ وَاسْتَعْمَرَكُم فِيهَا. Then we have some of this, Professor Shari'Ah mentioned the hadith. There is a clear hadith on greening the earth, that the earth is created inherently a pleasant place. And it is your duty to make it green. And there is instruction on greening the earth through planting. And according to one hadith, if you have a shoot in your hand and you know that you are dying, you still plant it. This is the idea, not necessarily that you will live as you are dying to enjoy it, but make it for the generation, for society. You must prove to be a beneficial member of society and contribute to the extent you can to even at that condition. Then we have the idea, of course, mentioned by Professor Tansri, of this wasatiyya in i'tidal, establishing balance. The idea of mizan, this is the terrestrial balance, the idea. And the idea of wasatiyya that relates to human conduct here. This is wasatiyya not only is addressed to the human personality in conduct, avoiding excesses of behavior, but also to the use of resources, that the use of the resources that must be in a balanced and sustainable way, avoiding excess, even in the use of water. And water is, a sustainer of life, of course. وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ. Someone was using too much water, making wudu, and the Prophet advised not to do that. And he was saying that there's plenty of water, even if you're sitting by the river, that you must not do that. It will become part of your akhlaq, your personality. This is the idea of i'tidal. And this is also a very relevant advice to our generation, to the youth. In the consumerist society, things have earlier been said that this is something that Muslims themselves have not really acted upon. It is also a check against, there's too much attachment with the materialist aspect, the kind of predatory capitalism, as is mentioned. This is not against the advice of Islam. Predatory capitalism is maximization of profit at all costs, ignoring, as Professor Shari'Ah mentioned. And then you have in the Sharia the advice, al-tuhur shatrul iman, that cleanliness is a part of the faith of a Muslim. It is so relevant to the idea of sustainability. Cleanliness goes a long way, not only from body and attire, but to all aspects of life, to your home environment, to outside, to your living environment. It becomes a duty, a part of the akhlaq of the Muslim, and the faith of a. In fact, it's given a direct place into the faith of a Muslim. And then also, I think Islam's recognition of this pluralism is Sharia recognizes, the Quran recognizes the validity of these great religions, Judaism, Christianity, and monotheistic religions. That means that you recognize and you coexist with them. In fact, it has given, a structure of separate life, rights for Christians and Jews that may be living among Muslim societies, that they should practice their marriage laws or their property regimes and whatever they do. This is coexistence and respect for that is an aspect of, I think, sustainability making the societies stable, recognizing the rights of others. And the prevention, earlier said, Tansri, the facade and in land, in the sea, and was vividly illustrated. There is so much about the environment and protection of the earth and all living creatures. And in addition to us, there are other nations. And the protection to climate, the climatic protection is a theme in the Quran, so much so that Islam constructs a kind of eco-theology. Becoming environmental protection becomes a part of the faith and the belief of Muslims. When you have belief in Tawheed, in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the extension of this, that there is one humanity, and that Islam addresses human beings as such, as well as Muslims. This unity that is in the essence of Tawheed creates among humans. And then vicegerency, Khilafah, that also is addressed to the humanity all itself. That is a kind of awareness of that we are partners. You cannot practice this predatory capitalism the way it's being practiced unless you recognize that and give everyone what they deserve in due observance of the akhlaq of Islam. It is adl, it is amana, it is truthfulness, it is being peaceful and an agent of benefit in society. These are the kind of aspects of the vicegerency that the Sharia advises, is an integral part of the Quranic teachings. Like we read in a hadith, La dina liman la amanata lahu. There is no deen, no faith, no true faith. A person who has no amana, he has no true faith. These are very emphatic, clear, very clear hadiths. Al-Muslimu man salim al-Muslimuna min yadi wal. Then also one of the hallmarks of a true Muslim is to say something of benefit or remain silent. To say something beneficial or remain silent. In the Quran, there is this advice. This teaching of the hadith, which is also a legal maxim, la darara wa la dirara fil Islam, it arises. Arises from the generality of the teachings of the Quran and hadith, that Islam, it characterizes Islam. It characterizes the Sharia. And there are details that these teachings, for example, are not just to build a theoretical construct. Islam is a practical religion. It is a practical religion because in the Quran, this phrase, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, those who have faith and who do good. Iman and Amal, side by side. This is a recurrent phrase. And Islam itself, by its definition, is very focused on the the practicality in making these values and teaching a part of your practice. Like al-ilmu bila amal ka-shajarati bila samar. Like having knowledge without acting upon it is like a barren tree without fruit. In acting on these values that we have mentioned, some of them, of course, one cannot really cover them in any exhaustive manner. Acting on these goes a long way to make society sustainable, to make these values a part of life. Like all aspects of Islam, in more detail, إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر. And that salat prevents you from indulgence in evil and lawlessness. If it doesn't do that, then there is something deficient. You must be aware of that. You cannot do that, pray salat and then go out of the mosque and indulge in all of these lawless activities. Iman must become, Islam must become a part of the personalities. And when things go wrong, when the balance of values are disturbed, then there is the idea of the kind of integral aspects of Islamic Sharia advice is ijtihad, reforming and initiating solutions to address the needs of society, of the generation. Islah and tajdeed, Islam and these values are not static. It must evolve with civilization, with the generation, and every generation. In fact, the urf of society is a recognized aspect of Sharia. It moves with the society within those basic structure of values. There are, to the Sharia, two aspects. These are the thawabit, the basic fundamental values, and the other aspects are the mutaghayyirat, those that are changeable. The changeable aspects are all they are amenable to these ideas of Islah, Ijtihad, Tajdeed, and what it takes, the idea of Islah al-Ard, I'mar al-Ard, and making civilization that sets an example for these values. The Islamic civilization is a distinctive civilization. It takes from the past but moves on with the values that are best in the educational system, in the culture and customs of society. Islam, although it is very self-contained, but it is also open. Clearly, we have taken from other cultures and civilizations, and we have contributed, and this is a part of Islam. This is something that is in fact conveyed in many hadiths that that when you al-hikmatu du'allatul mu'min, that wisdom is the lost property of a believer. Wherever he sees it, he is entitled to it. And like Al-Qaradawi in one of his books on government in Islam, speaks about democracy. And he's strongly supportive of it. And he says that democracy, the electoral aspect of democracy, it is a form of shahada. Shahada and testimony. People who vote for their candidates, they testify to his suitability. And democracy is a part of the hikmah of humanity. We have learned from our societies, from our history, that we need to have a disciplined system of governance subjected to these values of constitutionalism, of rule of law, and democracy. And these are something that we learn from others, and we practice it because there is everything supportive in Islam. There's nothing against it, and it becomes part of the hikmah. Islam is self-contained, but is also receptive. It maintains an open outlook to how we can evolve and enrich ourselves, our conduct, our society, our government, our generation, and our civilization. And yet, my final comment is, they said Muslim societies are not stable. We know that poverty, food securities, attention to agriculture, food production, there is lack of adequate investment. There is also, we are open to kind of competition, unfair competition of these predatory capitalism. Then we have in the Muslim societies, all sorts of shortages, employment, and the biggest deficit is dictatorship, the deficit of good governance. This is something that is essential for sustainability, sustainable society. Then we have somehow made ourselves targets of this Western aggression, 9/11, then war on terror. And we are now the principal victims of terror. And then COVID-19 comes on top of all this. Muslim societies are unfortunately unstable, and sustainability, to speak of those values, almost we stand almost apart from our basic values. That also tells us that, of course, COVID-19 is something that is this religion or that religion or this civilization or that, we all stand on the same footing. But to protect ourselves against the evils of these happenings, if those values go a long way. Those values, observing those values, like in the hadith also say that if you see a contagious disease broken out in a land, if you are in that place, do not go out of it. If you are outside of it, do not go in. And this kind of advice is central. It is really conducive to taking care and protecting the generation and people against the evils of this COVID-19. With this, I conclude my comments. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Can't hear. Tak dengar.
Prof. Tamim.
Prof. Tamim, we can't hear you.
Okay. Okay. I'm introducing Professor Datin Dr. Raihana Abdullah now.
Okay.
Dr. Raihana Abdullah is a professor at the Department of Sharia and Law and the director of the Academy of Islamic Studies, University of Malaya, and is also a registered Sharia lawyer and a certified mediator whose interests revolve around Islamic family law, Islamic law and gender, and Islamic law and society. She is an expert in the area of women's human rights, the issue of violence against women, and the human rights of the marginalized group of society, the elderly, children, and people with disability. She was the Dean of the Humanities Research Cluster from 2015 to 2016 and the Director of Center for Civilizational Dialogue from 2011 to 2013. She was awarded a fellowship with the Freeman Foundation for Salzburg Global Seminar, Austria in October 2008. She is actively involved in Muslim women's NGOs, especially in enhancing legal awareness for Muslim women in Malaysia, and is a member of the Association of Sharia Lawyers Malaysia. She has been appointed by several government agencies as one of the consultants in the Family Support Division under the Development of Sharia Judiciary Malaysia, and is also an expert panelist in dealing with Muslim women's issues under the Department of Islamic Development Malaysia. She is also a member of the Technical Committee on Sharia and Civil Laws, JAKIM. In 2011, at the 38th session of the Council of OIC Foreign Ministers in Kazakhstan, she was elected as one of the first group of 18 commissioners in the Independent Permanent Human Rights Commission, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, representing Malaysia until 2019. She was awarded for the International Fellow at the International Dialogue Center, Vienna, Austria in 2019. In 2017, she was one of the recipients of the National Maulid Rasul Award. Currently, she is the director of Academy of Islamic Studies, University of Malaya. And with this, may I respectfully call upon Dr. Raihana to deliver his presentation. فليتفضل.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you very much, Professor Tamim, for the introductions. And also thank you very much to ISTAC, IIUM, for inviting me to sit together to present idea and thoughts together with distinguished speakers, Emeritus Professor Tan Sri Zulkifli Raza, Professor Jasir Auda, Professor Dato' Hashim Kamali, and also Emeritus Professor Dato' Usman Bakker. And I think after listening to all the three distinguished speakers, I will focus my discussions on the topic of Sharia and the pursuits of sustainable society on the issues of women in Sharia, or according to Islamic perspective, especially in discussing about the terminology of gender equality. And I will start my presentations with historical background, which is, this is really familiar for everybody. And we know that Islam has reformed the customary law of the Jahiliyyah people by restricting men to a maximum number of wives, for example, at any one time to 4, and only the conditions that he can treat all his wives equally and justly, and also other aspect as well, for example, the talaq, the right of talaq, for example. And these actually, while discussing on Quranic reform, Professor John L. Esposito has mentioned that which has affected the positions of Muslim women by saying that in terms of the polygamy, I give an example, a Muslim man may have up to 4 wives, and this law represented another reform raising the status of women who had been subjected to unlimited polygamy practice in pre-Islamic times. So the point here that I wanted to raise is about raising the status of women. And he also shared the views of other scholars as well, argued that the status of women is inferior during the Jahiliyyah period, and the inferior status of women during this period was evidenced through the practice and customs of the Jahiliyyah people in matters concerning the family and social life. And however, the Quran has indeed clearly provided a respectable status to women. For example, Professor Fazlur Rahman further emphasized that the teaching of the Quran on the subject of women is a part of its effort to improve the conditions of and strengthen the weaker segments of society in pre-Islamic Arabia. Those are the orphans, slaves, the poor, and as well as the women. And these segments which had been abused by the stronger elements in the society. Hence, Professor Esposito as well said that is very convinced and concluded that the reform brought upon by the Quran definitely intended to ensure that women are not victimized, when he says that where Quranic reforms and values were incorporated, they serve to raise the status of women and the family in Muslim society by establishing the right of family members. And along the way, we can see that there's a legal reform occurred especially in the 19th-20th century. And this actually legal reform was pressurized by the needs of the society. And what happened actually in the 19th and 20th century, and we can see that the early legal reform, especially in the Islamic family law, touch on the codifications of the law according to the modern legal format rather than the substances. And rules relating to the family institutions as discussed in the classical Islamic law are deemed to be adequate for the Muslims to live according to Islamic principles. And such principles relating to the family institutions was regarded as necessity to be kept in its original state, and that any amendments were regarded as going against Islam. This is the perspective that we have during that early legal reform. Then, for example, I give you the one that I mentioned earlier. The practice of polygamy, for example. The classical principles of polygamy, for example, were also regarded by the state as adequate in curbing any abuse arising from the practice of this polygamy. Okay. So we can see that in the early 1920s, for example, there are Muslim countries, that have promulgated the law on marriage and divorce, which is more comprehensive than, for example, the Ottoman legislations. And this, we can see that followed by, for example, Jordanian law, family rights, 1951, the Syrian law of personal status, 1953, the Tunisian Code of Personal Status in 1957 at that time, and including Malaysia, as well as Indonesia, Brunei. And these several Muslim countries have attempted to have a legal reform. And the idea of reforming the law began when the classical interpretations of Islamic law was felt by the authorities in certain Muslim countries to be unsuitable to cope with the day-to-day problems that accumulated in the society, especially in the Muslim society. Thus, we can see that, however, does not show that the classical interpretations of the Quran and Hadith as found in the classical Islamic law books fail to guarantee the status of women. We are not argue by saying that what happened in the law along the way up until 19th, 20th century, what was discussed in the classical works fail to guarantee the status of women. This is not the argument. But the focal point of legal reform in family matters, as I said, that to strengthen the positions of women. And women faced many problems concerning family life when their husbands, for example, fail to take their responsibilities as enjoined in the Quran. And with this legal reform, we can see that women could now turn to the court to implement their rights. For example, in divorce, custody, and also claims after divorce. And up until the beginning of the early legal reform, until now, several decades of, compared to the early 19th and 20th century, we can see that there were three phases of legal reform, especially on the Islamic family law. The first phase is actually on the reform and the codifications of the Islamic family law, the one that I has presented and mentioned. And phase two is the implementations. However, many researchers have argued that in practice, women did not really benefit from such reforms. In the phase one, we already have probably a comprehensive, a complete legal reform in terms of the codifications. But in phase two, we can see that some scholars argue that women did not really benefit from such reforms. They criticize the implementations of the legal reform when certain aspects in the family matters prove to be disadvantageous to women. And of course, again, the scholars gave examples in which legal reform did not benefit women, mostly in matters, for example, concerning maintenance, divorce, custody, and also claims right after divorce. And some scholars argue that in this phase two, the issue of the implementations was stalled because of the attitude of the judiciary, or even other reasons as well, or other factors as well. But it is clear that in the early 20th century, many Muslim countries, while codifying their classical Islamic family law with a modern form of legislations, introduced several measures and steps to check and prevent any abuses in their society, especially to women. And the third phase is about gender equality. So now we can see that many, especially scholars, are talking about gender equality. They still talk about reform and codifications. We need to amend some of the provisions in the Islamic family law. They try to tighten some of the implementations, some of the weaknesses in the implementations. But now in phase 3, we can see that many scholars, women's NGOs were highlighting about the issue of gender equality. Okay. And we can see that the word or the terminology gender equality is not a new concept. In fact, the approach had been advocated in Islam based on principles of equity and universal justice. And equality, or is in Arabic equivalent to musawa, was mentioned in the Quran. And these principles actually emphasize the equal status between men and women, sourced from the Quran and the prophetic traditions, as well as fulfilling the requirements of the Maqasid Sharia. However, the concept of gender equality has now becoming more chic and trending on the international scene, a development parallel to the rise of the human rights discourse globally. In this context, the concept of gender equality was embedded as the foundation of policy and legal provisions, including the Islamic family law, in many Muslim countries. Malaysia, for example, these principles, gender equality, also took center stage and became the focus in the provisions and the implementations of the Islamic family law. And women groups and lobbies are also actively promoting these principles, especially in demanding for comprehensive reforms in Islamic family law. Nonetheless, this concept has often been misunderstood by the majority of society as a direct result of ignorance on how Islam perceives this concept. So now I will bring some or certain provisions in the Quran. For example, in Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 35. So we can see that how the Quran mentions Innal Muslimina wal Muslimat, okay, wal Mu'minina wal Mu'minat, wal Qanitina wal Qanitat, wal Sadiqina wal Sadiqat, wal Sabirina wal Sabirat, wal Khashi'ina wal Khashi'at, wal Mutasaddiqina wal Mutasaddiqat, wal Sa'imina wal Sa'imat, والحافظين فروجهم والحافظات والذاكرين الله كثيرا والذاكرات. So it looks like how the Quran mentions إن المسلمين, that is for male, والمسلمات إلى آخر آيات. And another verse, okay, Surah An-Nahl, for example, the translations will be whoever does good, whether a male or female. Okay. And also in terms of the civic society and the believers, men and women, are protectors of one another. And we can see that all of these duties and even more are implicit in the creations of mankind, as the Quran also mentions. So he created him and made him of two kinds, the male and the female. And this, despite these very explicit verses of the Quran detailing the equal treatment of women and equitability between genders, we can see that until now there are actually in some Muslim societies, women are treated oppressively. And this is something which is upsetting many, especially the women's NGOs, right? And we can see now the OIC, Plan of Actions in Advancements of Women, where the OIC OPA pledged to improve the conditions of women. And it decided that in Istanbul conference would contribute to develop a roadmap for women in the OIC member states. And it is necessary to empower women with knowledge and combat illiteracy, and access to quality education is essential to achieve the goal of equality. So we can see that how OIC through OPA also mentions about the importance of, to achieve the goal of equality. And it is also based on the recommendations made in the first ministerial conference on women's role in the development of OIC members in Istanbul, where articulates the commitment in addressing a range of difficulties faced by women, and committed towards eliminating all acts of discriminations against women. And of course, if you look into the SDG, the fifth goal is also about gender equality. And as I mentioned that this concept, or this gender equality concept, is not new. It gives an impression that these phrases has just been invented little less than a century ago. And sometimes among the Muslims, the Muslim society, sometimes the word gender equality give negative connotations in terms of sameness. I would like to refer to one of the scholars said that the interpretations of the gender equality in some of the international mechanism, international legislations, Professor N. Biaski noted in his writing in the Human Rights Journal, she said that the concept of equal treatment and non-discrimination in international law regarding equality and sameness can be two different things. One, not all differences in treatment are discriminatory, or equality does not mean identical treatment. And two, distinctions in discriminatory if it A, has no objective and reasonable justifications, pursues no legitimate aim. B, if there is no reasonable relationship of proportionality between the aim and the means employed to attain it. And for Bersky, for Professor Anne Bersky, she said that equality is defined more by equitability rather than sameness. And for instance, such discriminatory acts that may fulfill the objective of having reasonable justifications and proportionality are gender segregated, example, toilets, gyms, sports, and even physical performance tests for the military, all of which are considered justified under the personal preferences and physical differences between the genders. But we can see that now many people actually, or many Muslims actually prefer to use the word gender, or to use the terminology of gender equity rather than gender equality, although we can see that at the international level, either by the OIC or the CEDAW or other international legislations specifically mentions the term gender equality. And if, let's say, we argue that we need to go or emphasize on the terminology of gender equity, but some will say that gender equality is the right terminology. I think with that, I conclude my presentations. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rahana, for your presentation focusing on women and sustainability in societies. With this, we come to the last speaker of our today's webinar, who is none other than Professor Dr. Usman Bakker. To introduce Prof. Dr. Usman Bakker briefly, he is a doctorate in Islamic philosophy from Temple University, Philadelphia. Is currently holder of Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies and Renewal at ISTAC IIM. He is also Emeritus Professor in Philosophy of Science at University of Malaya. He was formerly Distinguished Professor and Director of Sultan Umar Ali Saifuddin Center for Islamic Studies, University, Brunei Darussalam. Professor Usman was also formerly Malaysia Chair of Islam in Southeast Asia at the Prince Talal Al Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., and Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic and Research at University Malaya. Dr. Usman is author and editor of 40 books and more than 300 articles on various aspects of Islamic thought and civilization, particularly Islamic science and philosophy, in which he is a leading authority. His most well-known books are Classification of Knowledge in Islam and Tawheed and Science. His latest books are titled Al-Farabi, Life, Works and Significance, and Colonialism in the Malay Archipelago, Civilizational Encounters, published in 2020. He has been named among the 500 most influential Muslims in the world since 2000. He was made a Dato in 1994 by the Sultan of Pahang and a Dato by the King in 2000. With this, may I respectfully call upon Dr. Professor Usman Bakker to deliver his presentation. Fadal mashkuran, ya Ustad.
Shukran. Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i mursalin Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Professor Tamim, moderator, fellow panelists, brothers and sisters, and ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and salam sejahtera. You know, in the panel of distinguished speakers, it's not wise to speak the last. The previous speakers, well, actually, I did prepare a plate full of food for my 20-minute presentation, but the speakers, it's not the intention, it's not intention to take away some of the food from my plate. But in effect, that's what's happened. There's little food left in my plate, just a little rice and sambal belacan. I hope you don't mind. The webinar, the Sharia, and the pursuit of sustainable societies may be understood, interpreted, and discussed in several different ways. So what I would like to discuss is basically three issues or what is the connection between the Sharia and sustainable society? Question number one. Question number two, what do we know and what do we think about the current discourse on the subject of sustainable society? Question number three, how can we enhance our conceptions of sustainable society? So these are the three questions I would like to touch briefly, inshallah. Let me go to the first question. What is the connection between the Sharia and sustainable society? Of course, the assumption of the seminar is that, the assumption of the webinar is that there is a real connection. And we have listened to the other speakers. They have shown that the connection is real and substantial. If I add my own emphasis on the substantiality connection, the substantiality of the connection by emphasizing 3 points. First point, there is a conceptual and philosophical connection between the Sharia and sustainable society. I hope young academics, young students, especially postgraduate students, will try to address this claim. All right? There is a conceptual and philosophical connection. Point number two, the philosophy of the Sharia and the philosophy of sustainable society converge on many points. Of course, philosophy of the Sharia, we are reminded by Professor Shari'Ah in his well-known book, all right? Is none other than the converge. But where do we converge? How large is the area of convergence that needs to be studied? The third point is there is a considerable overlapping between the content of the Sharia and the content of sustainable society. I'm just paraphrasing what the earlier speakers have mentioned, especially Prof. Yasir and Professor Hashim Kamari. Now, all right, if indeed there is substantial connection, what are the implications of it? I refer to 3 implications of that claim about being the substantial connection. claim number one, or the implication number one. The Sharia has a relevant role to play in the pursuit of sustainable societies. Implication number two, between experts in the Sharia and experts in the science and practice of sustainability. And implication number three, to the extent that religions other than Islam have their own versions of the Sharia, quote unquote, the Sharia. Of course, it's not the same word, different word, but after talking to scholars of other religions, they try to relate. Yes, they have their own version. So it would be very meaningful to conduct interreligious dialogues on the subject of the Sharia and sustainable society. Maybe a few have been held, but not much. So these are the three implications. Let me spend more on the implication number one regarding the relevant role of the Sharia. Professor Jasir emphasized a few times that what we mean by Sharia is not, he used the word, the word in only a particularistic or specific, but in other words, what he means is not piecemeal. I put in my word,
partialistic.
One way to, yes, one way to approach the Quran into specific individual laws and injunctions regarding the Sharia. And Professor Hashim Kamali emphasized the divine code of conduct. So if we combine that, in the sense the two would tell us the idea of this complete set, a complete system or divine code of conduct. I would add that this divine role of the Sharia, because this Sharia, one understood and implemented, is not entirely divine, and neither it is entirely human. So this is the beautiful thing, the meeting of the divine and human roles in the implementation of the Sharia. And this is very relevant to what is going now, because there are people in the world, including at the United Nations, who wants to pursue programs of sustainability on a global scale by forgetting God, by forgetting religion. I don't think we can accept that. Now, therefore, regarding this relevant role of the Sharia, we need to study this role in details. We have been given our broad outlines, but we need to study this role in detail. We need to conceptualize this role with clarity, and we need to actualize this role in the form of concrete societal programs on sustainability and sustainable development, guided by the principles of the Sharia. And I would conclude my discussion of this, the question of the role. I think the Sharia role in this respect is twofold. All right. Essentially speaking, the Sharia's role is one, to clarify the higher purposes and characteristics of sustainable society. That is role number one. Role number two, to provide guidelines for human conduct and way of life that would best reflect the values of sustainability. So in other words, here, with human conduct, of course, referring to self-reform. It's very important as far as society is concerned, this reform, and reform both at the individual level and at societal level. Muslim scholars throughout history have always talked about reform, but they talk about before reforming others, let us reform ourselves. So it should begin from self-reform. All right, the kind of, if you're not, you can sustain. We need to be self-sustained, right? And that, for example, through the realization of the middleness, of the moderation or golden mean. Now, all right, let me go now to question number 2. What do we know about the current discourse on the subject of sustainable society, and what do we think of it? Now, I concentrate on the Muslim participation in this discourse because I think that's what we want to address mainly. With respect to Muslim participation in the discourse, it need to be addressed. This is a kind of self-criticism, and I hope we take it in a positive way. When we look at the Muslim participation in the discourse, in the current discourse on sustainability, on sustainable development, issue number one, we are not well versed enough in the history of ideas about sustainability, sustainable development, and sustainable society. Consequently, we don't know the unique experience of the modern West in coming to terms with nature. The contemporary narrative on sustainability is constructed on the basis of the modern experience that is based on a particular philosophy of nature and a particular philosophy of man, the modern Western one. The roots of the current discourse may be traced to the beginning of environmental and ecological consciousness in the 1960s, which is purely an environmental issue and economic development. But of course, the discourse evolved over time. Then it went to the question of sustainability, or came later, and the issue of sustainable society, even more recent. I did in many years, more than a decade ago, I wrote one article. I think at the time Professor Hashim Kamali was at this tag, and one of the issues of As-Sajarah, I wrote a long article about this historical background of this issue. Now, but other civilizations, including Islam, have different philosophies of man and of nature, have different historical accounts, have different narratives about the encounter of man and nature. Issue number 2, we are not bold enough, intellectually speaking, to present alternative ideas on sustainability in intellectual discourses at international forums, when in fact there are many such ideas in the Quran and prophetic hadith, or that are based on them, waiting to be articulated. I refer to Professor Hashim Kamali. He mentioned also those concepts. I repeat them here because of their importance. And recently, I gave a talk on middleness, on the balance and sustainability, by quoting a lot from his wonderful work, the middle path of moderation in Islam. Now, I have in mind such ideas as wasatiyah, which I translated as middleness and moderation, khairu ummah, best community. If God talks about the best community and criteria of being the best, and if we think sustainable society is very, very good indeed for humanity, then the criteria of sustainability should be part of khairu ummah. I think that is message. And of course, the question of istiqrar, I translated as sustainability. There's that whole passage, verses 30 to verses 39 in Surah Al-Baqarah, related to that verse, walakum fil ardi mustaqarrun wa mata'un ila hin. To me, that verse is related to the issues of sustainability. And this, of course, raises the question of what should be the appropriate. Is it istimrariyah, or is that or what? Or istiqrar? And then Dr. Ahmad Kamali dealt a lot with issue of balance and equilibrium, tawazun, and of course in the Quran in form of the word mizan, or mawazin in the plural. Now, these are ideas that again bring into sharp focus the spiritual dimension of human development that has been lost and the true meaning of the ecological balance between the human and natural world. Changes to the contemporary discourse on sustainability. Issue number three, we are not critical enough. In the case of the discourse, we easily become conformists in the realm of ideas. We are happy to see the realization of the Sharia at the level of Sharia compliance of ideas and products made available by foreign sources, but generated or Sharia to see whether in accordance with Sharia or not. But Sharia inspired, Sharia generators, the new product, new ideas are generated from within the community by the practice of the Sharia. Number four, and last, issue number four, we are not visionary enough in our comprehension of sustainable society. So, what happened? Consequently, our conception of sustainability and sustainable society needs to be comprehensive and refined. Now, therefore, I conclude by addressing this issue. How can we enhance our conception of sustainable society? I think we look at the current definitions. There are dozens of definitions. If we Google, then you can see that. And there are different definitions. Why there are different definitions? Because there are different perceptions, understanding of what sustainable means. For example, we quote, a sustainable society is one that has learned to be within the boundaries established by ecological limits. I underline has learned to live. And then ecological limits. It can be maintained as a collective and ongoing entity because practices that impose excessive burdens, I underline that, excessive burden, upon the environment have been reformed or abolished. Right? That is one definition, one popular definition. Second definition, a sustainable society is one that is able to satisfy the needs, I underline, satisfy the needs, without diminishing the chance of future generation. I underline future generation. This is a definition from World Watch Institute. Another one, sustainable society is one in which the global environment and natural environment is properly preserved, underline the word preserve, and development is being carried out to meet the needs of the present generation, underline, to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the future generation, So actually, the second definition and the last definition there, there's a kind of hypocrisy. I'm not saying that the Westerners, every Westerner is hypocritical, but their civilization, as it is found now, is hypocritical. They want to talk about future generation. They talk about the welfare of future generation. But they are the same people who hate the families. Some of these people are opposed to the family institution, go against the normal meaning of marriage and family, and yet they have to talk about the welfare of future generation. To me, that is hypocrisy, civilizational hypocrisy. Okay, so if you look at those definitions, what do you see? The underlying assumptions of the definition is that the modern West pursues sustainable society through social experimentation, trial and error, experimenting with society. And then in my article that I referred to environmentalism about sustainability through the bitter way. But anyway, this definition, as I said, we need to be critical just now. The definitions beg question. All right, what do you mean by ecological limits? All right, What do you mean by excessive burdens? What do you mean by satisfied its needs today and tomorrow? And here the question, the key thing here is what needs. This is precisely the contested issue, the needs, right? Because the needs are now defined by the rich or super rich, not by the by the poor. But the point is now the issue of needs. What do we mean by needs? The right needs. These needs to be discussed and debated. That is my point. So I think it would be better. It would be a better definition to conclude. It would be a better definition if we say that a sustainable society is one that has the capacity, because sustainability is about capacity. Capacity of what? Capacity to preserve an ecological balance between the natural world. So there are three levels of environment in this ecological equation. The natural environment, meaning mainly the biophysical environment or ecology, the built environment, and the human behavioral environment. The behavioral environment, built environment, and the biophysical environment. The three levels of environments must interact in a healthy way, and that is the role of the Sharia divine law. So thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Usman Bakker, for your presentation. And you have come up with a new definition.
Tamim, we can't hear you.
Oh, I see something. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Usman Bakker, for your presentation. Alhamdulillah, we have now come to the end of our session. 5 of our distinguished panelists have spoken on the subject of Sharia and the pursuit of sustainable societies without summarizing their views, because they were very clear, very eloquent, and the audience were able to understand very objectively the thoughts of our distinguished professors and panelists. So without wasting our time, let me now move on to the questions. We have received several questions. It is not possible to really ask all questions due to time limit. We have the time up to, inshallah, with the permission of the panelists, we go up to 12:15 Malaysian time. Prof. Jasir Auda, is it okay with you? We go up to 12:15 Malaysian time, because for you it is late night.
It is. So
okay,
I will do my best, inshallah. I'm happy. It's all right.
Thank you very much, Prof. Jasir Auda. I will start the question. I have a few questions for Professor Jasir Auda. To begin with, can Islam form the basis of something whose basis is in capitalism? I think the question is referring to a sustainable development goal. So according to him, the sustainable development goals is rooted in capitalism. Can this form the basis? Is it proper to make the Sharia the basis for riba economy?
Yeah, well, alhamdulillah, I think we need to work on different levels and on parallel lines. There is one line of working with others, because we are not alone in the world as Muslims. So we have to find a common language and common objectives and work with others within the systems that are not Islamic. But parallel to that, we also have to work to found and to construct Islamic systems. So within the riba system or the capitalist system, we could work on Islamic financing and trying to have initiatives for companies that do not do riba. But at the end, the bigger system we know is a system that is based on interest in everything in it. In parallel to that, we try to develop our own economy, our own, I recollect the Malaysian attempt to have the bilateral country trade agreement. Try to develop our own economy as Muslims through different countries or different initiatives in parallel to trying to deal with the system. Similarly, sustainable development, the same thing. We can have a dialogue with people who believe in human rights, in the rights of women. We believe people who believe in the environmental degradation crisis and they want to make the world a better world. We have a different philosophy that we should work on in parallel to that. So we cooperate with others, but we also have our own initiatives as Muslims in terms of the rights of animals and the rights of trees, for that matter, and before that, the rights of humans from the Islamic perspective. So inshallah, we work in parallel with that.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Jasser. May I request any other panelist would like to add? Yes, Transri, please.
I think the alternative, what is the alternative if we don't work? I mean, I take it is true that we don't want to work in the capitalist system, but if you don't do this, then what do? Now we are going to work in a system that is not only capitalistic, but also unsustainable. So we are caught. I mean, we have listened to the panel. At the end of the day, it is about amanah in how to preserve the divine codes of ethics and stuff like that. And just because we are not in tandem with them, we say we withdraw. And what is the alternative? We got a double whammy. You've got the capitalist system on you, and then you are becoming unsustainable at the same time. So I think the choice, I really agree with Professor Jasser. We need to work in parallel. I mean, my difficulty with Muslims is that we make a judgment very quickly.
Okay, thanks.
It is non-Islamic, and therefore we stay out. And therefore we have no, just like Professor Usman Bakker say, I've been in this sustainable world for 20 years now. I hardly see any Muslims talking about Islam, let alone talking about, what systems you want to develop.
True.
So if we stay away, then I think we're not going to put our foot in. And COVID-19 has opened up the box. It's a time for everybody to rewriting the rules, reimagining what it's all about. UNESCO has got a forum about reimagining education. Where are the Muslims?
Yes, true.
Yeah? And we say this is not ours because UNESCO is haram or whatever word you want to use. I want to stay out. What is OIC doing? They are not even organizing anything. So we lose out in many ways. And I think we need to be humble enough to go where we need to go and then build our what we call influence over that period of time. And this is what this university is trying to do in a very small way. We need to change our mindset that we have the confidence to contribute and participate. Then inshallah, I think the doors will be open for us. Thank you.
Okay,
If I may add as well, I mean, I think if I may add to what Prof mentioned, that we work with like-minded people. And we cooperate. When I was in Malaysia, I found like-minded people from the Chinese community, from the Indian community, from others who do not take Islam as we take it as a faith and as a way of life. But I found lots of commonalities with a lot of people because they have similar values. And even if the person is a non-believer, Islam is for everybody. Islam is to make everybody's life better. And the values of Islam, if they believe in some of our values, then we cooperate with them. It doesn't mean that we compromise our identity or our faith or our initiatives when we cooperate with others. So we cooperate, but we also preserve our identity. So that's what I wanted to add.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Prof. Jasser. Anyone else would like to add?
Yes, just one brief point. This cooperation, the Quranic guideline is تعاونوا على البر والتقوى ولا تعاونوا على الإثم والعدوان. So our guideline is that we cooperate in whatever is beneficial and moral, and we stop cooperating when it indulges in exploitation and all the evils of capitalism. I think the task before us to define this middle path. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Dato, please. Yes, Prof. Dato, yes.
Yes.
Yes, Dr. Prof. Usman. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we are hearing Prato.
Right.
Yes.
No, I
Go
said
ahead.
I'm troubled by the question. Right. The question is very big question. Is to talk about compatibility with Islam and capitalism. All right. Before, there are many other issues. Since we are talking about sustainability issues, I mean, there are many things that we need to do. Yeah? The Sharia, for example, if you are guided by the Sharia, so many things to be done with regard to the question of sustainability. So, for example, why not we talk to the non-Muslims, the others, the Buddhists, the Confucianists, the Christians, and so on, about the common issues that we share. Right now, all of them are talking about how to deal with these problems of sustainability from their perspective of their own religion. So let us do it. But of course, we can't talk to them unless we also know our own. That's why I emphasize then where are we when a few other this is question now, okay, what are we doing? Not a question of is Islam compatible with compatibilism. That is another.
Yes, bro. Hello? Are you connected?
Hello.
Yes. Okay. Prof. Dato, have you finished?
Yes, I finished.
Okay. Can we go on to another question? How do we make Sharia more digestible for the public in the context of sustainability or sustainable development? How do we make Sharia more digestible for the public? Can we start with Prof.
Yes. Yes. Sharia is made for the people. It is addressed to the people, and it must relate to their conduct and their capabilities. And the hadith guideline is that when I advise you to do something good, do it to the extent of your ability. And but when I advise you to avoid something, avoid it completely. Now the Sharia also in this way relates to the capabilities of people. In some periods of history, we were not able to implement certain aspects of the Sharia. Like Abu Yusuf, the famous judge of the Abbasid time, he addressed the caliph that if you punish the thief and you implement the hudud, if you do this and that, things will be better. It looks as if the hudud were not being implemented even at that time. So it is something that we must be realistic. We must look at what people can take of the Sharia and not be totalitarian to ignore the realities of society. Now, about sustainability, I think there is a lot of advice. And what advice do we prioritize? We should sit down and prioritize some ideas and boil it down to practical proportions, and then address it to society and devise an approach, whether this part is the government, this part is this institution or that institution. So that is the way to go about it, to be practical, to address, to think of what people are comfortable with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Dr. Hashim. Any other panelists would like to add more? Okay, then I move on to the next question. My question to the respected panelists is, to what extent the dependency of the Muslim world on the West affects the realization of sustainability? Let me repeat. To what extent the dependency of the Muslim world on the West affects the realization of sustainability?
Well, if Tan Sri, you take it.
Okay. I
Yes,
think
Tan Sri, please.
as far as sustainability is concerned, from my point of view, it is not about dependency; it's about interdependency.
Yes.
I think that's the word that we want to know. For example, if you are overtly dependent on the West, then you are not sustainable in that particular sense. And the issue, therefore, how do you get this partnership working together, so that they also learn from us? And I think from this panel discussion, there are a lot of things that they are taking from the Muslim, whether realizing it or not. But these are, I think, the issues that I think we need to be very clear about. And this is where I would want to iterate that we need to be on the global platform, so that they are there to learn from us as much as we are there to learn from them, and take what is beneficial to us, and they will take what is beneficial to them. I think this dialogue is not happening as far as sustainability is concerned. In fact, for example, when we talk about spirituality, I'm serious about the SDG 18. When I float this idea to my non-Muslim friend, and most of them will say it's time to talk about this, we in the West has cut it off. And when it comes to COVID environment, then when it comes to the question of mental health and all these other new impending problems, then they go back to this whole idea of emotion, spirituality, consciousness, thing that they've taken for granted before, that we Muslim think is important. So I think the question is, how do we get interdependent? In other words, work as equal partners rather than being subservient to one. And I think it's time to look at it, because we already see the performance of Western nations in combating COVID compared to the Eastern part, including New Zealand. I think we have controlled it a little bit better as compared to them. And all is because we have got a lot more interdependency in our society as compared to the Western. I hope that would give some clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tan Sri.
Can I add just a brief point to this?
Yes, Prof. Tanto.
Yes. I think if you think our dependency on the West in terms of science, in terms of medicine, in terms of military hardware, in terms of so many other things, there is little sustainability in so much one-sided kind of the total domination. We talk about balance, about the middle path. There is no middle path there in this kind of, overwhelming sustainability. We ought to balance this out first before we can talk of meaningful sustainability. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dato. Okay, next question is, COVID-19 poses much ecological problems. Vaccination is significant, but there are issues to do with unfair distribution. How do we teach the Islamic value of ecological balance? Prof. Dr. Usman Bakker, or anybody?
No, I leave Tan Sri Zul.
I am sorry. I think when it comes to ecological balance, when we talk about Islam, people do not believe us. I mean, for example, if you look at the chart of balance ecologically, the Muslim countries among the richest in the world fare the worst. So what balance are we talking about? The number of poverty in Muslim countries which are rich is amazing. So I think we have lost the game, and this is why I like the discussion that in our context, the Islamic context, when about sustainability, it is about the practice. It is about the practice. How do you demonstrate this in our own realm, that we can manage it because we have got these values, this principle, this philosophy, not just to articulate them rhetorically, and say Islam has got the solution, but where is the solution? I think it's time to work on the solution and make it happen. And this COVID environment tells us that we have been, quote unquote, put at a stage where we do not have the technology, we will be sidelined. I mean, it's very clear when you look at the distribution of the vaccines. Yeah, United Nations has just made a statement. 10 developed countries has done 75% of vaccination in their own. 130 countries has not done a single vaccination. You can see what the disparity is all about. At the end of the day, if you are not there as partners, people will always talk in the language of Trump, America first, Europe first. We are not going to be there. Although they will say at the end, this is about equity, this is about humanity, this is about partnership. When it comes to the crunch, they will always talk about themselves. But because we don't have. Now, I'll give you an example. So many years ago, I went to Cuba, because I know Cuba then and still now is second to none as far as vaccine is concerned. 12 vaccines in the world are produced by the Cubans, including some of the things that we are using today. Now, we went there to find out meningitis vaccine, to find out the halal vaccine in the true sense of the word. It is not the halal because we have no other, no abuse vaccine at that particular time for meningitis using vegetable-based, right? And Cuba was about to ready to share that technology with us. But unfortunately, when I take it home and talk to our Muslim friends, they do not even understand what vaccine is all about at that particular time. And therefore, the effort to work with Cuba on this very viable sort of vegetable-based vaccine doesn't come to fruition. So my issue is basically, it is us that needs also to make the advances at the same time before we can talk about how do we actually do this in an Islamic way. And if we don't do that, then forever we will be discussing. There'll be many, many seminars of this nature, but we will not be able to convince others that Islam really has got a solution unless we practiced it within our domain and people will see, yes, this is a solution that they want.
Okay.
If I may add as well,
Jasser, yes.
I mean, to add what Prof said, that I think we also need to do research from the Islamic point of view on issues, because part of our weakness is that we don't have strong research that is applied, that takes the Islamic values and the Islamic perspective and applies that into something that is practical. And that is the role of academia, universities, and so forth, and research centers, how we can do research that is useful, because it is the mind that starts to build the technology and the development, not just the political arms, but also the minds, the countries that got a lot of research done on education were able to compete. Allah.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Okay, another question is, from your point of view, what kind of macro policies should the governments of Islamic countries have in relation to the prevention of COVID based on Maqasid al-Sharia? From your point of view, what kind of macro policies should the governments of Islamic countries have in relation to the prevention of COVID based on Maqasid al-Sharia?
If I may,
Yes.
if I may think aloud, I think it's important to guarantee basic health care for citizens. COVID-19 is not a dangerous virus, but because people who had the resources, they go in the hospital and they come out of the hospital, even if they were in the 70s or 90s or whatever. I mean, people who got the right treatment and got the right oxygen and the right hospitals were treated. The problem is with the people who don't have the means. They don't have the oxygen. They don't have the vaccines now and so forth. So I think it's about more of an economic, bridging the gap between the rich and the poor in terms of health. I think this is one of the important policy areas that as Muslims, we should give our people as Muslims. We should invest in that. As somebody who lives in Canada, I see how the importance of investment in healthcare. We have healthcare in the Constitution, and therefore it is a constitutional right. It's not just a law, and it's not just a matter of one government versus the other. And that is one of the cornerstones of the stability of the society. And perhaps that's why the numbers in Canada are much less than the numbers in America when it comes to death, because it is not a business. People are not getting richer when others die, you see. And I think as Muslims, we need to even work further than that. And it is possible that we do it, inshallah.
I mean, can I
just a
follow?
brief
Yes,
point to
Ansari.
that.
Professor
Yes.
Jasir? Oh, you go
Dr.
ahead.
Hashim, please.
Yes, the maqasid, one of the maqasid is protection of rationality, of rational judgment. This issue requires, is open to all rational approaches and solution, how Muslim countries can cooperate in meaningful way. They should use their good judgment, how they can do it. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Can
you.
I just follow
Ansari,
up with
please.
Professor
Ansari.
Jasir, sir? I think you made a very profound statement, Professor Jasir, when you say that we need to look at solutions differently. And there are two things that have been bothering me, and you have just stirred the hornet's nest, and I'm going to come back to you. One is on medical health. I'm a medical person, right? And I always believe that it is a right. It is not about profit making. I stopped working in the medical health field because people are making money out of people's misery. And I think that's not what medical health is all about. The second one is, of course, education. Let me deal with health first, I think, because we can understand this better. I think health is about exactly what you say, it's about making people's life better. All right. Now, I'm now confronted with an issue in my university because my hospital now is the first hospital in the university that is Sharia compliance, you know, and we celebrate, right?
Mashallah.
But I told my hospital person, if you are really Sharia compliance, then all of us should be looking forward to close down the hospital, not to expand it, not to build more buildings, not to create more doctors, not to create more beds. We are looking forward, how do you close down this hospital? Because we are Sharia compliance, we follow to the rules that everybody now, let somebody say, health is part of our business, and therefore I can look after my health. I don't have to depend on somebody else. I know what medicine is all about, and therefore our incidence will go down and down and down and down. At the end of the day, nobody needs a hospital. You know, but when I say that to my staff, then they suddenly find, my God, I will be out of employment.
Yeah.
You know? So this kind of contradiction, where are we? If I talk about, if I talk about Sharia compliance, and I'm serious, let's demonstrate to the world that we are very Islamic, that we don't need hospitals because we can look after our health using public health and stuff like that. Is this a rational proposition, or am I dreaming?
Well, yeah.
Practical.
Yes. Okay. Okay. May I proceed to another question? This question is addressed to Datin Professor Raihana. Do you think that in the perspective of the Islamic Sharia, gender equity or gender justice is more accurate rather than gender equality? Does this mean that gender equality will lead to sustainable societies? Datin, please, to begin with.
Yes, I have expected that this kind of questions. The different terminology between gender equality, and also gender justice. So for gender justice is actually something which is different compared to gender equality and gender equity. But as I said that to maybe some groups of Muslims, they prefer to address any issues concerning of protections of women, to recognize women's human rights, for example, to use the word gender equity. But for some other groups, especially those who actually at the international level that discuss and fight for certain issues on the gender issues. So the terminology that they use is gender equality. Okay. And when I speak to some of my colleagues, whether the Muslim scholars, for example, my colleagues, okay, who also are Muslims women, so they sometimes use the word interchangeable between gender equality and gender equity. But for me, whether it's a gender equality or equity, it does not mean sameness. Sameness means that you will receive this, and that is also sameness. But equality and equity is not that kind of terminology. As I said that Professor N have discussed, but a different treatment does not mean that there's a discrimination. Okay, so I think for me, I would rather use the word gender equality. But when someone discuss with me to use the word gender equity, for me it's interchangeable terminology. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If I may as well.
Sir, yes.
I agree, Jazakallah khair, Professor Raihana, that we understand equality as equity in Islam, not as sameness. And we also understand gender as Allah's created type of male and female, not gender in the socially defined type as it is in the English language. I live in the West. Gender, unfortunately, in the West is understood as socially defined, not naturally defined. We Muslims believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala خلق الذكر والأنثى. He created male and female. Not that male and female define themselves the way they like. And it's a big problem here. Alhamdulillah, and like hopefully in the Islamic world you don't see this, but here it's a major problem. They let kids who are like 11 and 12 and 13 define their gender even different from who they are. Like they tell the children in primary schools, like in America and here and in Canada, like think about it. Are you in the wrong body or are you in the right body? And if the kid who's like a boy say, "Oh, I think I'm a girl," then he starts to go through a change, and this is crazy. This is madness in terms of going against the fitrah of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, the natural creation. That basically we believe that gender, if we can use the word gender, I don't normally use it, but when I use it, I mean male and female. I don't mean socially defined or psychologically defined type.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Jasir. Another question is, how ethical reform of Muslim mind and thought are important for a sustainable society? Let me repeat. How ethical reform of Muslim mind and thought are important for a sustainable society? Any panelists?
Well,
Yes, Prof.
I think this was addressed in a number of lectures. Please go ahead.
Well, I'll be very brief. I started by saying that the Sharia contemplates a moral society, a moral and economy in society. I think that the morality aspect is central to Sharia, from the Sharia point of view, therefore to sustainability. If you think that you violate moral values and then you think of balance and sustainability, that is unrealistic. I think morality is the sustainer, stabilizer of society and therefore of sustainability. Mr. Chairman, I have to go.
Yes.
May I thank you all. It was a privilege to be with you, but I have another appointment. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Hashim Kamali, for your articulation and deliberation.
Jazakumullah khair.
Inshallah, we will have one or two questions more. And thank you very much for your presence, inshallah. Yes.
And if you can
please.
allow me to, because it's getting late, my time.
Okay. Okay.
Jazakumullah khair.
So this means we will come to an end. We have so many questions. Inshallah, we will compile these questions and send to our respected panelists so that when they prepare the paper for publication, they can answer these questions. So with this, I take this opportunity to thank Tansri Rector, Professor Jasser Auda, Professor Dr. Hashim Kamali, Professor Dr. Raihana, and Professor Dr. Usman Bakker, and all those who have participated in this international webinar on Sharia and the pursuit of sustainable society. May Allah reward you all for your patience and perseverance and tolerance. Inshallah, the ISTAC will be continuously organizing a series of webinar, inshallah. And the next webinar will be on the 22nd of March. 22nd March 2021, we have a webinar. And the topic of that webinar is a new philosophy of science for the sustainability of planet Earth. A new philosophy of science for the sustainability of planet Earth. And we have well-established and distinguished scientists who will be taking part in this webinar, including our Tansri Rector, who is also a scholar from...
I surrender.
So with this, I once again take this opportunity to thank every one of you for your presence in this webinar. Thank you very much, and may Allah bless you all. Wabillah tawfiq wal hidayah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We'll stay in touch, inshallah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tansri Dato.
We are not over yet. We will come back to you and we'll work together, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Okay. So thank you, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Have a nice lunch. And have a nice dream for Professor Jasser.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Dr. Yasser.
Thank you, Prof. Jasser. Thank you, Prof. Jasser.
Thanks. Well done, Tamir. Who do you have for the 22nd March? Who do you have in mind?
Yes, we have you and the director of IKIM, and then we have one professor from chemical engineering from University Kebangsaan, Malaysia, and Professor Dr. Hafiz of the Kuliah of Medicine.